I'm doing a great work and I cannot come down. Why should the work stop so I can come down to you? These are the words of Nehemiah as he built the walls fortifying Jerusalem over 2,000 years ago, as told in the book of Nehemiah in the Bible. Today we see, just as it was back then, that Jerusalem is the source of heavy conflict in the Middle East, with multiple groups of people vying for control over the ancient city, and global powers weighing in on the conflicts that have been brewing over centuries. Join us as we delve into the mystifying history of Jerusalem and Israel, exploring the ongoing struggles and complexities that have shaped this ancient area for over 2,000 years. Through riveting discussions, we unravel the mysteries surrounding Israel's pivotal role in global affairs, its significance in the Abrahamic faiths, and the intricate web of U.S. foreign policy in the broader Middle East. Get ready to expand your understanding of one of the most misunderstood regions on Earth, here on the Great Work Podcast.
Got so much good info.
Guys. So, Jess is back. Jess is my first repeat guest. You guys loved the episode with her before about the United Nations. Today, we're going to talk about the hostages. I think we have a unique perspective being two women, seeing how the hostages were talked about, treated, and just the denial of what's happening to them overall. It's getting very frustrating to talk to people. And like Jess and I spend a lot of time on TikTok Live talking to these people, and you can't really get a word in with them because as soon as you get a point in, they change the subject and then they jump to another thing and then they sneak in their little like, well, it seemed like they all had a good time being held hostage for 60 some days. So we're just gonna put this out here, our actual thoughts, and then we can just direct the pallies to this from now on, you know? Like,
this is going to be a one-stop shop for everything hostages.
Yeah, definitely.
Literally.
So the hostages were taken on October 7th. Many were murdered. Many watched their family members be murdered, and then they were immediately taken into captivity. And they weren't really given much food. I think many of them weren't allowed to see sunlight for days. One escaped, and then these innocent Gazan civilians you guys are so concerned about actually brought him back to Hamas instead of bringing him to the Red Cross or something. The Red Cross isn't really doing a lot. Jess, what are your other thoughts, updates on this?
So I think from my perspective, we have to strip it back to the whole idea of what hostages are taken for in the first place. Any intelligent person would know that a hostage being taken is purely for leverage in the future. Otherwise, a hostage is just a nuisance to the captor because they rely on food, they rely on care, they take up resource, right? So what good reason is there to actually take a hostage apart from leverage and propaganda? So I think once the people start understanding what hostages are actually there for and what they're taken for in the first place, then we can really get into the realities of the hostages in Gaza right now. But you touched on it briefly. I think it's really important to clarify that even if they look well then when they're being released and they look happy and they look smiley, there are many things going on in the background that we know but you don't know about, which we can more than happily educate you on, which would completely defy the way in which they presented themselves upon their release.
A couple things. Many of them came out, they've lost like 30 to 40 pounds.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I would love Hamas weight loss camp or whatever. I could probably stand to go there, but not against my free will, right? Like not against my own will. And those people didn't ask for that. There's one girl who was put in there. They weren't allowed to speak above a whisper. So she still has not stopped whispering because she was beaten so terribly if she accidentally did not whisper. This is the same girl whose father said, thought that her body had been found just completely like annihilated, honestly. And he said, I'd rather her be dead than a hostage because I know how bad it is over there. 3 weeks in, they realized she actually is a hostage and she has come out traumatized. They lost so much weight, right? These hostages, they were also drugged. So when they decided to release them, they gave them essentially like date rape drugs.
Yeah.
Like Rufalin, something like
I
that.
was told that they were given a mix of clonazepam, which is a benzodiazepine, and ketamine, which is the drug that just killed Matthew Perry. So they're pretty lethal drugs.
So they are giving them access to drugs. I thought they didn't have any medicine in Gaza, by the way. I thought there was an embargo on that. They gave them that to make them look happy upon their release. You know, drugging people, that is also a war crime, by the way. You guys are so concerned about war crimes, that is a war crime. So looking at the state that they were in just in that isolated incident really does not give you a good picture about how they were treated in captivity, the effects they're having after captivity. I think there was something about a girl, they put her foot back on backwards. What you know more about that?
Yeah, so I've written a list of like the 10 hostages who have had the worst sort of after effects of what's going on. So I'll go through them really quickly. So Maya Regev, she was an 18-year-old girl. She was shot by Hamas on October the 7th. They then operated on her in captivity and sewed her foot on backwards. That is very akin to what Mengele did in Nazi Germany when he sewed twins together, you know, all of that kind of thing that we hear about. Her brother, Itai Regev, was operated on in captivity without anesthesia. Mia Shem was operated on by a veterinarian. Her best friend, Elia Toledano, who was captured with her, has now been killed in captivity. We know that to be true. Yocheved Lifshitz was an 85-year-old woman who was beaten with a metal pole in captivity. Abigail Eden was a 2-year-old girl who has been released out into the world now without parents. She's now an orphan. Emily Hand, as we know, only speaks in whisper because she was threatened so severely that she's now too scared to speak anything other than a whisper. Hannah Katzir was in her late 70s. She was taken hostage very healthy. The PIJ decided to pronounce her dead. She then got released alive, and she suffers now with a severe heart condition, which she didn't have before she went into captivity. They're saying it's akin to like broken heart syndrome, which is a real thing. Elma Avraham was denied essential life-preserving medication, and upon her release went straight to the ICU and was put on life-saving ventilation. She's fine now, but they thought at a point that she was going to die. Eitan Yahalomi was beaten by Palestinian residents upon his arrival to Gaza. He's 12 years old and his father is still being held hostage by Hamas. Amit Susana, there was a video when she was being taken hostage of the terrorists saying that she was going to be used as a sex slave. Upon her release, she was walking like a crippled old lady. She's in her 30s. And then the last one, which we all know about, is Or and Yagil Yakov, who are brothers. They were branded with a motorcycle exhaust so that if they were to escape, they'd be easily identifiable. So you guys love telling us that the hostages looked fine and healthy. But you have to realise that we're only like post 2 weeks of these hostages being released. They are still probably mentally extremely affected, and they will not start speaking for a very long time. It took Gilad Shalit, who was in captivity for 5 years, it took him 6 months to do his first interview, and then we heard about the horrors about what happened to him. So,
and I'm glad you brought him up, because when you talked earlier about you take hostages for leverage, with that case of Gilad Shalit, he was exchanged for 1,000 prisoners, including Yahya Sinwar, who planned October 7th. When they took hostages, Hamas thought that they would get an exchange like they did with Gilad Shalit, and they thought they would probably get all 8,000 prisoners released. They knew they took Americans. They thought they would get Hamas terrorists released out of U.S. prisons and probably international prisons. I don't know about the UK, but there are Hamas people arrested all over, because they're not just in Gaza. I know you guys want to pretend that they are. They're in the West Bank. They're all over. And they have cells in the United States that we know about. And they have prisoners who have been arrested in other countries that we know about that they wanted to get out. And that was the whole reason they were taken as leverage. And honestly, had Hamas not videoed and posted giddily the footage of what they did on October 7th, and I keep thinking that I've seen it all, and then I hear another terrible story. I can tell one in a minute, but like, had they not videoed it and been so giddy while doing it, I don't think the global community would have understood the severity of this situation. Israel has said for years that these people are radicalized beyond belief. You wouldn't understand. Seeing how radicalized they are, I think, is what has enabled the globe to shift towards okay, Israel, we're going to say whatever we're going to say in the news media, whatever, but do what you need to do to get rid of Hamas.
100%. 100%. I think that a lot of people say, look, the world supports Palestine, but they're referencing the children and they're referencing the people that have only picked up on this conflict in the last 2 months, who are marching the streets calling for a ceasefire, without recognizing that Hamas is the root of all evil. They're not actually calling for the democratic, they're not speaking for the democratic governments who are in support, invariably, constantly in support of Israel. Their support may be wavering and they may be becoming less tolerant and they may be putting more pressure on time. But when push comes to shove, they very much would support Israel over Hamas any day of the week. And I think that's where it really matters.
Well, and I mean, when we want to talk about we want a better life for the Palestinians, you and I do too, but it's impossible to have a better life when you're being radicalized to the extent that they do. I mean, this is a generation of children that was taught it is better to sneak into Israel and murder innocent people in their beds than it is to become a doctor, become a lawyer, just become a fruit stand owner, do anything like to be productive members of society. But no, they just want to, do whatever they're
Yeah.
doing. I have no idea what they're doing.
For these kids, they've been radicalized from like the age of 5 or 6, and we know that to be true. They attend summer camps, which are like jihadi training camps. In school, their maths equations say how many martyrs were killed during the Second Intifada. Like everything that they're taught, they're programmed through the minds of Hamas to learn. Hamas controls the education. The minute they touch school till the age of 18, they are being pushed this narrative, and then it doesn't help that their parents have also been pushed the same narrative. So when they go home after school, they're hearing exactly the same thing. There's no other option for them and they don't know any different. So the young kids I sympathize for on the basis that they know no different, but when they hit an adult age and they hopefully have a relative moral compass, there's no excuse anymore. And that's why when people say that there are hostages in Israeli prisons, we call them prisoners, who are children, they're referencing the 15, 16, 17-year-old kids who have become prisoners for creating terrorism on Israeli soil. You and I know that at the age of 15, we had moral compasses. I mean, I was out causing chaos at 15. Like, I was living my life. I was morphing into an adult. I was having fun. At 15, you have a very strong head on your shoulders. You've gone through puberty. You've reached adulthood. These kids who are 15, 16, 17, who are literally trying to become martyrs and trying to do jihad, they know better. Or at least they have the capability to know better. And the fact that they're not seeking to know better is part of the problem as well.
You're exactly right. And the other thing I have a problem with when people say, like, well, they're innocent because they were brainwashed. At the end of the day, if you're brainwashed or not, if you cause trouble for another group of people, I mean, if the people of Gaza were really sitting in there just so brainwashed to hate Jews, but never, ever, ever did anything about it, I don't really care. But the fact that they do something about it and they are taught to do something about it and they're shown how to do something about it, and really, I think it's a kind of a dumb thing to think that like people want to do actions, right? They don't just want to sit around and think all day. So, I mean, it's very uncommon to have a group of people that radicalized that don't end up acting on those radical ideas and radical thoughts. If they were just thinking them, who cares? But when they act on them, actions have consequences, whether or not you're brainwashed. And in a US court or something, I think that they take pity and mercy on you, right? I know in the United States, like if a teenager commits a terrible act, it might be a lighter sentence depending on the act, but you also have to remember when Israeli military courts are prosecuting these people, if they get out early, they just go back into the same radicalization centers, and they cause more terror. There's nowhere they can go to just be normal again. In the US, usually if you go to jail, a lot of them like get super into the church, like they'll go to religious services, they'll do better that way. I believe Israeli prisons, they make you declare your affiliation with which terrorist group you're a part of, and then you're kept in a separate area of the prison for just the group you're a part of, and then it's kind of their responsibility to
Yeah.
watch over them.
You have the odd case. So you have, yes, you're put in a cell with the people who are part of the terrorist faction that you're a part of, but that's much like here in the US. You know, you've got the Bloods won't be put with the Crips. The Bloods and the Crips will be separated, and they'll be together in their own gangs. And that's the same as it is in Israeli prisons for safety of the prisoners themselves. But Israel as a prison institution does offer these people a better life. It does offer them degrees. It does offer them healthcare that they've never received before. They have meals. They have like 3 meals a day. They are actually having better lives in prison. And some use it to their advantage. Yahya Sinwar went into prison and got 3 degrees. So it was looking pretty promising for him that he could have perhaps done better for himself. Getting 3 degrees is a real feat. It's a real victory. Who was benefit from those 3 degrees, benefit from the free healthcare of Israel giving him life-saving brain tumor operation, and come out and become the leader of Hamas. But on the flip side, you've got someone like the son of Hamas, the Green Prince. He went into prison, he studied, he got a degree, he recognised that, wow, Israelis are not all that bad. They're giving me an opportunity in here that I've never had in Gaza or in the West Bank. I've never been able to study like this. I've never been able to complete a degree. I've never been given 3 meals a day without fail. I've never been given healthcare like this. And he came out and made a better life for himself. He completely renounced the hate group. He completely renounced Hamas. He said that he could recognise that there were no qualms or queries with the Israeli people. They were good people and they were being defensive. And now, I mean, he became a Mossad agent for 10 or so years. But apart from that, now he's living a very prosperous life. He converted to Christianity. He married. And that's what if you use the Israeli prison system to your advantage, take a leaf out of his book, because that's what you can make of it, and that's the life that you can give yourself from it.
Totally. And I mean, we're not sitting here saying like prison is the best thing ever, right? I mean, obviously freedom is paramount, but being that they call Gaza an open air prison, it sounds like that prison is worse than the Israeli prisons, right? And actions have consequences, like life has consequences. If you do something that makes you end up in jail, it's like any other thing in life. You can either choose to come out of it stronger or not. And Sinwar, maybe in his twisted mind, thinks he came out stronger from it. But, it just, there's a moral right and wrong, and it's never moral to murder.
Never. Yeah. Never. There's no excuse for it. There's not a feasible, we can say occupation, we can say years of oppression. I mean, that's like, the best clarifying and parallel thing for this. Jeffrey Dahmer had a really terrible childhood. Really terrible. He was subject to horrendous bullying, horrendous abuse by his parents. He didn't really have a place in this world. Did that justify what he then went on to do in his later life?
Obviously not.
Exactly. And that's the sort of argument that people are continually making, is that the Palestinian people in Gaza have had a terrible life. It's no wonder they want to fight back. It's not a justification. It's just not. Aside from anything, the open-air prison theology is absolutely abysmal and pathetic. If you go on YouTube and you search up, and I want you to type this in, anyone watching this, 5 things to do in Gaza, watch the video and let me know what you think. I don't know any open-air prison in the world that has resorts, 5-star resorts, beach clubs, restaurants, Mercedes dealerships, all the things, shopping malls, a Starbucks. I mean, what in the hell open-air prison is that? When you reference the open-air prison, you're talking about the blockade on Gaza. That blockade is in place by Israel and Egypt because quite literally they refuse to do import and export with a terrorist organisation. They refuse to provide a terrorist organisation with anything that may better them as a society, but equally they refused imports from a terrorist organisation for fear that they might get poisoned. So it's no wonder there's a blockade in place. And if that's what you're referring to when it comes to open-air prisons, we know that the hostages released were drugged, thought there was an embargo on drugs, so they're sort of defeating the open-air prison. Rockets are definitely not allowed through a blockade, so open air prison isn't holding up too well. You can't reference one thing and then disregard the other side of it, which is, how are they getting the rockets? How are they getting this medication? Why are all the Hamas leaders fat with big bellies? Like, why are they able to make terrorist tunnels under the ground that are capable of fitting cars in, but they're not able to provide shelter for the civilians? Like, you can't think about one and not the other. I'm so tired of the narrative.
Well, and also, like, when people say, like, well, why aren't they allowed to have a military for defense purposes? First of all, they've never accepted sovereignty. And one of the things that we have done so wrong in the world is we have given them all of the benefits of sovereignty with none of the responsibility. Sorry, if you're not a sovereign state, you don't get a military. And actually, Gaza's never going to get a military for the next 200 years. Sorry. And also, acting defensively is not shooting rockets at civilian areas. Acting defensively is not allowing troops to encroach your border or terrorists to encroach your border. I don't think they have too much of a problem with that there, because no one wants to go to Gaza anyway, apparently. What are they defending against? The only time that Israel attacks them is when they attack first. If they wanted those attacks to stop, they could stop attacking.
Exactly. It's very simple maths, but people always sort of come up with varying perspectives. But I think the reality is, over the last couple of years, we've seen that Gaza's actually flourished as a city. We've seen these restaurants and these shops and the way their culture. We see people that make these YouTube videos, 5 things to do in Gaza. Like, we see what was happening in Gaza, and it was beginning to come to some sort of semblance of a really beautiful place to be. And what Hamas did is, in one day, they ruined the entire progress that they'd made in the last 2 years. The last 2 years for Hamas has been relatively quiet. We thought it's because they were sort of coming to terms with Gaza being Gaza. So we thought they were making the best of what they deemed to be a bad situation. Really, what we know is that they were secretly laying back and planning something and lulling us into a false narrative that we thought that Hamas was sort of disintegrating, when in fact they were just planning something. But the reality is, we've seen that Gaza has the ability to be a very beautiful place, and they could make the best out of it. And if Hamas wasn't in government, I can assure you that Gaza would be a much different place than it is now, or that it was 3 months ago, because the people of Gaza, the Palestinian people, deserve a government who cares about them. We've never once, as pro-Israelis, said we want to take over Gaza and we don't want any Palestinians. You'll be very hard pressed to find a single pro-Israeli or Jew or Zionist who will say we want to kill all the Palestinians, because it's not what we want. We want safety for the state of Israel, and we want the Palestinian people to have a good life, because every person deserves a good life, even if they've been radicalised. They can be de-radicalised. Nazi Germany was de-radicalised. It's feasible, it's possible. We're not satanic, evil people who want to see people killed. We don't have horns. Like, we're just normal people who can recognise that the state of Israel has every single right to exist, and at the same time, the Palestinians deserve better by their own government.
Totally. And back to the hostages thing, when we talk about these endless ceasefire things, it's like, well, they need a ceasefire. And then, of course, Hamas never accepts one, or usually it's the Palestinians that walk away from the table. But how insulting it is that, if you're saying that there should be a ceasefire, you're saying that Israel should be negotiating with Hamas and allow Hamas to continue existing. And what Hamas has said is they're going to do October 7th over and over and over and over again. So for some reason, all the pallies can say, well, yeah, October 7th was bad, but it's time to move on. It was because of oppression, whatever. No, they're going to do it again. If it didn't disgust you enough to see all of the rampant sexual abuse and horrific videos and massacring, ceasefire means that happens again to more innocent Israelis. Because it's not like they're going to fall back and say, actually, next time we're just going to attack the military, right?
They don't have the capabilities to attack the military. That's the problem. That's why they'll always go after civilians. Mm-hmm. But for me, right, the thing that I find the most troubling in all of this is, one, that the public hasn't got the same level of outrage for the lack of returning of hostages than it does for calling for a ceasefire, but also the way in which the public has responded to the hostages that have been released is sickening. It's so sick. We've never, ever, ever seen a situation like this where the hostages released are scrutinised to such a degree where people actually think they've fallen in love with their captors. That is so twisted. I feel like I'm living in a parallel universe at this point. I can't get over, I'm a woman, I can't get over the way in which women have reacted to the hostages being returned. It's embarrassing. It's abysmal.
Just how mad people have been over the last few years over, like, I mean, we've seen it a lot in America where a girl will come forward accusing a man of particular stature or power of attempted sexual assault. Like, we look at one of our Supreme Court justices. He was accused of attempted sexual assault. That resulted in a week-long trial before Congress talking about his high school diaries where they were trying to say, you blacked out and don't remember that you tried to sexually assault her. Not even rape. Then we get to the point where we have women whose pelvic bones were broken, and they're like, well, you can't say that was Hamas. Like, what?
There's countless evidence of women's breasts being cut off and thrown around like a toy. There's evidence of a woman being gang raped and then shot in the back of the head. There's pelvic bones broken. There's the video of Shani Luke, which we've all seen, where her legs are contorted, broken visually. There's the video of Naama Levy, who's still in captivity with blood pouring out of her private parts in a video. These are denied. I mean, I had someone who commented on the video of Naama Levy when I posted it before it got removed, saying she might have just sat in blood. Aside from that, which is shocking in itself, I don't know any other point in history where there has had to be irrefutable proof, visual proof, of women being raped. That is disgusting. That is disgusting.
And not only women, because that's bad enough, but I thought I had heard the worst of the stories. Just yesterday, I heard a story of a man who was castrated. They stuffed it in his mouth, and then they FaceTimed his mother and his friends and showcased that. So if women, if you don't want to feel bad for women, I guess, it's happening to the men there too. These are your pious religious jihadists, by the way.
Yeah. It's, the phrase has been thrown around so much in the last few weeks, and it is so telling. And it's just Me Too unless you're a Jew. And we've heard that, and people think that it's not about being Jewish. It clearly is, but it's beyond that. It's about being in Israel. That was the whole idea of what happened, is you were in Israel, or you are Israeli, or you're Jewish, or you believe in the state of Israel. All right, then you're a verified victim. The whole Me Too unless you're a Jew, it's perfect. It encapsulates everything that we've got going on right now. If a woman comes forward to you in your country of residence, for me the UK, for you the US, and says, I think I've been raped, they have a rape kit, they are given a trial, they are not at one single point does any civilian come forward and say, I actually need to see the video of it to believe it. And then I might see the video and I might think that it's fake anyway, because I don't believe the media that you give me anyway, so I might scrutinise it. But anyway, until you give me video proof, it didn't happen. That's never happened before.
Or even courtroom proof, or, like a rape kit. Bernie Sanders' former spokeswoman said, why didn't Israel take these rape allegations more seriously and perform rape kits? Because they were held in captivity in Gaza. They can't do a rape kit. They're in Gaza. Like, these things.
And a lot of the women...
Obvious. You're a spokeswoman for a presidential campaign, for a very prominent one. You can't get yourself to the place where it's like, and by the way, if Israel's in control of everything in Gaza, why can't they make it to the woman to do the rape kit, right? The narrative falls apart here.
It's delusional. It's absolutely delusional. And that sort of, the thing about why can't we get to the hostages is also something that I think when we're talking about hostages, we need to talk about, is that the whole idea and the whole premise of the Red Cross is to deal and mediate with situations like this. The Red Cross should unequivocally get access to those remaining hostages. And if they can't because Hamas is denying it, they should be out in the streets demanding it. Absolutely demanding it. They should be going to Iran, going to Qatar, and absolutely unequivocally saying, we will no longer protect the Gazan community if you will not allow us access to these hostages. And yet they've done absolutely none of that. And then when the hostages were released, they took credit for being a glorified taxi service for the hostages. It's absolutely terrible. It's terrible.
We can't put trust in these NGOs anymore, or anyone.
No. Never again. Never again.
No. This is the whole reason, by the way, for the state of Israel. Because Me Too, unless you're a Jew, at least you have a country that will prosecute these things and a military that will go after these terrorists. But we're seeing the large-scale denial when Israel exists. Imagine if it didn't exist and all of this was just swept under the rug.
Yeah. I mean, the people that are calling right now for a ceasefire, the people that are calling right now for an end to the state of Israel, the people that are saying that Zionists are evil, this is a message to all of you guys. You are precisely the reason why the state of Israel has to exist. You are the definition, you are the precise, complete and utter embodiment of why Israel has to exist. Because in the last 12 weeks, you've shown us nothing but your pure Jew hatred, and we see right through you now. So we don't even need to speak on how little me and you think of them. But what you're doing is being the catalyst to Israel being more motivated than ever to ensure the safety of the state of Israel.
Totally. And not only that, but when we look at why Israel's needing to exist, I'm going to go one step further. If you want to say one bad thing about the IDF, you need to rank where's Hamas and where's IDF. And if you place IDF anywhere near Hamas, this is not a conversation worth having.
Yeah. I literally spoke to someone this morning, like a friend, who said to me, I think that the IDF is just as bad as Hamas. And I said to him, look, I'm not going to have this conversation with you because you're my friend and we're not going to get into this. But let me tell you that the IDF is not even in the same moral category as Hamas. The IDF acts defensively and it protects its civilians. Hamas acts offensively and doesn't protect its civilians. So they're two worlds apart. They can't even be put into the same category, let alone sentence. It's not logical.
War is terrible. War is awful. War was started by Hamas. And in all of these circumstances, it is started by whatever the Palestinian cause du jour is, whether it be the PLO, now Hamas, whatever it is in 15 years, because they're not going to stop, right? Or if they did put a quash all of the Palestinian movements, there's probably going to be free movement and they're going to head on up to Syria or down to Yemen or to, I don't think the Iranians will let them in.
Yeah, I don't think so either.
But I mean, they're going to head wherever they can, wherever there's chaos in the region, or they're going to try and come here. It sounds like a lot of them are going to Ireland. So good luck to the Irish government with that.
Yeah.
It's unfortunate, but they cause problems everywhere they go.
And I hate even generalizing like that. And I know that we can. So I know I can recognize that they cause problems everywhere they go. But I like to give people the benefit of the doubt. But the mere fact that some of these hostages were held in the homes of Gazan residents who assumably weren't even Hamas is very telling that we can't literally trust a single person within Gaza. Noah Argamani, the girl who you would have seen kidnapped on the back of a motorcycle, she was like one of the poster girls for being taken hostage. They're now saying that she was likely not released in the prisoner exchange deal because they don't think she was kidnapped by Hamas. They actually think that she was kidnapped by Gazan residents and they can't trace her. That's what they're saying now. So we talk all too often about these, innocent Gazan civilians. Are any of these men innocent? We will never know. And I can't trust a single man coming out of Gaza, let alone the women and the children above the age of 15. Are they innocent? Or do we have to hold them accountable too? At this point, I have no trust left.
Well, and let's say some of them are. Why are they presumed innocent and IDF presumed guilty? Mm-hmm. Why are the Jews who were killed and raped and kidnapped on October 7th, why are they presumed, well, they're occupiers or whatever? So they deserve this, but the innocent Gazans don't deserve. I mean, when we look at the actual IDF operations and how they operate with all of this, I think right now there's a 0.62 casualty rate per bomb dropped. That's almost half of a person per bomb dropped. Israel has dropped more bombs on Gaza than the United States did in all of Iraq and Afghanistan, I believe. I believe in just Iraq, there were 3 civilian casualties. Do you notice how this genocide has been stuck at about 20,000 casualties for the last 3 weeks? Why is that? You know?
I think it's probably because Hamas lied about that casualty count to begin with, and the world caught on, and now they're sort of having to save face. That's what I think. But equally, as you said, like, we know just how precise Israel is being. It's a mathematical certainty. Israel reports on every bomb dropped, and if we're going off of Hamas's numbers, even by Hamas's count, the precision of the Israeli bombing is so beyond precise that it's incredible. It's better than any army's ever done. I think the average rate is, I think, 5 people per bomb. Israel's coming in at 0, which is a huge victory for Israel in itself. I don't want to say victory because war is never, ongoing warfare can't be deemed a victory, but what I will say is it's something that the IDF can be proud of. In retrospect of this war, is their precision, and the world will hopefully wake up to that precision when we finally get the rest of the iceberg, because I think people also forget that we're in ongoing warfare. So the information that we're being given by the IDF is only the very tip of the iceberg. It's the 10% that they feel comfortable releasing. Post this war, which is hopefully in the near future, we will start to receive the rest of that information. And I'm hoping and praying that the world might actually change their tone a bit when we finally get the 90% that we're being withheld from at the moment. Hopefully, who knows?
But when we look at the civilian casualties, they're talked about as if they're just not at all related to this conflict. If they're the women and children of terrorists that are choosing to stay back with their terrorist husband or whoever, their terrorist sons, that are actively, I'm not just saying that they're terrorists because I want to use the word terrorist. I'm saying like they're holding Hamas meetings in their home. They're storing munitions there. They have a tunnel entrance there. If women and children are choosing to stay behind, they're choosing to, in their words, martyr themselves. And is that, why is that considered the same as a innocent civilian casualty? Because it's not.
Hamas never defines who is a civilian and who isn't. And we'll never know that because we can estimate that there are 40,000 Hamas militants, but because they're not a registered army, we actually don't know. It could be 100,000. There's 2.2 million people in Gaza. It could be 1 million people. We can make these estimates, but I think it's very telling the images that come out of like the West Bank, for example, where you see hundreds of thousands of people marching for Hamas, that I think our estimation might have fallen considerably short. I actually don't think that there are only 40,000 Hamas militants in Gaza. I think the number is probably tenfold what we've estimated. But the reality is we will quite frankly never know. And anything that we assume is speculation, because Hamas will never give us the privilege of that information, and they don't need to because they're never held accountable. So they can keep using this as a ploy.
When we looked at the war on terror, George W. Bush said, "We will make no distinction between terrorists and those who harbor them." That kind of became a de facto like rule and law because we know that terrorist organizations hide amongst civilians. So when Bush said, like, listen, if you're just in the building, you're still guilty in our eyes, that he was never called a genocidal maniac. I mean, he probably actually was, but I don't.
But never to this extent. Never. There's no army in the world that has ever been held to a higher degree of scrutiny than the IDF. And there's likewise no army in the entire world that has ever done more to protect the population of the opposing side than the IDF. So the two things don't really run hand in hand. So you have to deny one to accept the other and vice versa. But the reality is, you all hold the IDF to such a high degree, but then you fail to acknowledge what the IDF is actually doing to protect people. So either which way, the IDF could actually go and do genocidal maniac things. You would still say the same as what they're doing now. So either which way, the IDF is always going to be a terrible entity to you, regardless of the effort it makes to not be. We can't win.
No.
We just can't win.
And I wonder with that, how much of that is just like bad education. Because like some of my comments I get are like, well, you'll see when this is tried before the Hague. I would bet a lot of money that no IDF commander, soldier, anyone goes and is tried at international courts. I mean, for all of these international laws that Israel and war crimes that Israel somehow commits, it's very interesting that they've never been convicted of a war crime. No Israeli
Yeah.
commander or anything like that has been tried at the Hague, sentenced, anything like that. This
Yeah.
war will not be the exception.
No. The irony is, right, firstly, Hamas is one big walking war crime in itself. I mean, they, by definition, they're a war crime. De facto, end of. But how different would this war have played out if on October the 8th, the international court said, we will utterly condemn Hamas, we will bring them before international courts, we will charge them with war crimes, and Hamas will be completely and utterly disintegrated? How different would this have played out? People can try and take Israel to international court, and I'm sure, in fact, I'll put money on it that after this, people will be calling for Benjamin Netanyahu, Benny Gantz, the whole lot of them to go to international court and plead for their cases that they did not commit war crimes. You keep telling us that we will see. We're going to see. I just like to reiterate, guys, you are going to see that Israel is not committing any war crimes. In fact, it's going above and beyond any army that has ever committed anything that resembles war crime. It's done more to prevent war crimes than any other army in the world. So you will see.
I think they'll be in for a rude awakening, although at the same time, I think that a lot of these people will no longer pay attention when this war is over. And so they're going to remember the lies that they were fed. They're not going to wait around to see them disproven. And then the next time this conflict picks back up, because every 2 years there's something, they're going to say, well, remember all these war crimes they committed back then? Well, actually, they didn't commit any of those that you said. And then it's just a cycle of like idiocy. It's crazy.
It's a continual cycle, and it's so boring. And for people like me and you who spend so much time talking about this with people, I found, and I don't want to be mean or anything whatsoever, but I found that a lot of the pro-Israeli people are very not intelligent, but they come with a lot of facts. They have a lot of knowledge. They have a lot of background and information, and it's probably primarily because their information doesn't span the last 2 months of what they've learned on TikTok. This has been their whole lives, or this has been their whole family's lives, or this has been something they've been genuinely passionate about and hopeful for the future. The people that we're arguing against who say you will see, the pro-Palestinian argument generally, and this is a generalisation, so there are the odd few that are not like this, they come very uneducated. They don't come with a lot of information that is beneficial to the conversations. They'll come with the whole threatening, you're going to see, but then they can't back up that claim, or they'll come with genocidal maniacs, but then they can't back up that claim. And there's no point saying it if you can't come to me with an educated stance. Because if you came to me with that information, with facts and figures and a tone of voice that wasn't incredibly insulting, and maybe I would actually table a conversation with you. But the problem I've realised in the last 12 weeks is giving pro-Palestinians a platform, at least for me, has been non-beneficial, because generally speaking, not only do they have a really bad tone, but they just don't have the knowledge to argue with someone like me who knows so much about this situation.
Or they only use their emotions. And it's like, here's the thing about emotions. You can show me a million videos that will make me feel sad about what's going on in Palestine. I don't want to live there. I don't think that they have a beautiful, amazing life, overall speaking. 50% of Palestine or Gaza was unemployed. So that top 10% or whatever can enjoy those beautiful Mercedes dealerships and beach clubs, but a lot of them had terrible lives. My thing is, I can show you just as many videos of Israelis being massacred. And I can actually show you a lot of sad videos of people all over the world beyond this conflict. And the thing is, if we want to out sad each other, that's just not a thing I want to be into. I want to be talking about how can we make this not a thing anymore. And how to stop this is to stop the terrorist organization that allows it to continue.
Yeah. People talk regularly about proportionality, which is something that we've already touched on in our last video, but the reality is proportionality, firstly, in terms of weaponry and actual warfare, there's no war that is absolutely to the finest degree proportional, but also in the proportionality of what you said about things that make us sad. Sadness is subjective, upset is subjective. So I might see 100 videos of what happened on October the 7th and be genuinely heartbroken and think that that outweighs the sadness that you feel when you see babies amongst the rubble. It's subjective. You won't feel the same sadness that I will feel. And likewise, I don't feel the same sadness that you feel when you see kids among the rubble. It's completely and utterly, it depends case by case. So you can't tell me that there's some sort of proportionality and that there's 20,000 people that have died in Gaza. Those 20,000 people, although all of them are a tragedy, to me, I'm still going to feel more affected by the 1,400 people that were massacred in Israel by default, because they're my people and they're my family and friends and all the people that I know and love. So it's completely and utterly subjective, and I don't think we can even make that case. And if people try to make that case, then they don't really understand emotions or like the impact that different scenarios have on different people. And that's just very basic.
Totally. And that's
So
the whole
basic.
reason we have like a moral standard to abide by, and we have courts to act as intermediaries, because if this was just a conflict of like outsadding each other, no one could win that argument, right? Because of just what you said. People identify with who they identify with. By any moral standard, what Hamas did was wrong. And by any moral standard also, Israel has the right to respond, you know?
Yeah. It's just sad. And that's why when it comes to the hostages, that isn't subjective. That's not a subjective situation. The reality is they took hostages. If that was your mum or your sister that was taken hostage and then they were released, I don't think you'd question whether they came out looking happy. I think in retrospect, you'd want retribution for the captors that stole them, but two, you'd look at all the bad things that had happened to them, i.e. the Israeli hostages on average lost 10 to 20 kilograms, which is like roughly between 10 and 15% of their body weight, or the fact that they all came out with lice and rashes, or the fact that some of them can't speak, or there's a million things. I promise you, if it was your family member being held hostage, you wouldn't say they've fallen in love with their captor, though. You wouldn't say that. Hostage taking is not something that's subjective. It's not something that's emotionally charged. The reality is black and white. They were taken hostage, and we know, and you know as well as we know, that they are going to suffer long-term mental problems off the back of this.
Yes, absolutely.
Long-term. And the whole idea of the Red Cross, which made me really sick, was when the hostages' families were asking for updates, and the Red Cross was saying, just think of all the Palestinian families affected. It's sickening. It's sickening.
It just,
honestly, I don't even know what to say on it. It's
No.
just, it's given me a whole new perspective on the meaning of these bodies, the UN, the Red Cross, the Human Rights Watch. I will no longer listen to a single word that they say and take it as gospel. Never again. Never again.
No, because it goes back to, I mean, there needs to be a standard applied to every single actor. And if it isn't, then they're not worthy of being trusted.
Yeah.
So, well,
it's just awful.
I hope this has acted kind of like a processing session for us. Hopefully it's as cathartic for the audience as it is for us, that, you know, when we're not fighting with pallies on these lives, we can say all of this freely and not be interrupted and called baby killers. So, you know, I hope this was cathartic. Jess, is there any?
I guarantee you when we post this, we're going to get exactly the same thing.
Always.
Because we just can't win. We can't win, but at least we can go onto a platform like this and let our emotions run. And say what we want to say without being told that we're genocidal approvers, or without being told that we're raging bloodthirsty maniacs. It's just a nice place to do it, you know, but I guarantee you will get the exact same response. And that's really sad. And I'd love to see a pro-Palestinian podcast akin to something like what Amanda's doing, where it's very knowledgeable and it's very factual and it's just very well thought out and educated. I haven't seen a pro-Palestinian podcast take the same format as this, and I would like to, because it would be a good platform for, and we'd enjoy watching it likewise. So yeah.
Well, thank you. I think we can wrap this up. Everyone follow Jess on TikTok if you don't already. She'll be linked in the comments. And go on her lives. Her lives are way more fun, because a lot of the times she runs lives, instead of just arguments with pallies, it's like friends chatting up there, and then we just respond to comments, which can be more fun anyway. And you get a lot of pallies who still comment, which is very surprising to me.
I I think at the beginning of my live career, I was very much doing like one-on-one debates with pro-pallies. Eventually it became like 5-on-1s, where like lots of my pro-Israeli friends were joining me and we would bring one person up and we'd all talk. But I think over time we realised that there's just no point. They don't know enough to actually argue with us. So rather than giving them a platform and then coming up and embarrassing themselves, I take the format that I'm going to sit with my friends and we're going to go live and we're going to chat and we might speak about Israel at the same time. And then if you've got any comments and you're a pro-pally, write it in the comments and we will address the comment. So yeah, I do get a lot of pro-pallies and a lot of the comments are very negative. And you'll see it in my chat, like constantly. You can't read the messages because of the amount of hatred that's being spewed constantly. But at least it's a safe space for us to all talk and address the occasional intelligible question.
Totally. Well, thank you again for doing this. Jess will come back, everyone. Everyone loved the episode she was on before. She'll come back again. So
I'll always be back. I'm never going anywhere.
Awesome.